Hello everybody, it's Kara from Wild Book Garden, and today I'm here with part 1 of my June wrap-up. Very exciting. I think this is going to be reasonably on time now. Yes, it's a big moment. So the first book I finished in June was Frost Hollow Hall by Emma Carroll. This is a historical fiction book with a little bit of a ghost story. It is set in winter of 1881, and our main character is a girl named Tilly, and she ends up going to work at this old manor house where, with this very reclusive family, because years ago there was a tragedy where the son of the house, named Kit Barrington, he drowned in the lake under mysterious circumstances. And a few days before this, Tilly had actually fallen into the lake herself, and she had been rescued by what she believes is Kit Barrington's ghost. So she ends up going to the manor and trying to figure out what happened, what is going on, why she saw Kit's ghost. And I really enjoyed this. So I just tend to like this kind of book anyway. It's like a combination of cozy and spooky that I just tend to really enjoy. I'll say right now that if you get annoyed when you don't know exactly what age bracket a character or book falls into, you would probably be annoyed by this one. I did like Tilly as a main character. I also thought the family dynamics were really complex and interesting in this book. I kind of thought I had figured out where things were going to go, and then the author kind of did something a little different, which I really appreciated. I also really liked this character, Will. He's a pretty significant character in this book, and he ends up kind of getting dragged into this mystery that Tilly is trying to solve, and I just really enjoyed him. I found him a really fun and likable character. I also really liked the setting. I thought that was very engaging. I liked this creepy old manor house. I also liked the historical fiction aspects. I think this would be a great book if you're kind of hesitant about historical fiction, because it's very approachable, and not in a bad way. I really love historical fiction and I still enjoyed this, but I think that it gives you a feeling for the time period and some details about the time period without overwhelming you. We got to actually see some details about, for example, how servants in a big fancy house would have actually spent their days. I feel like that's something that doesn't get covered a lot in historical fiction. I did have a couple issues with this. One is, I mentioned how much I enjoyed Will. Tilly kind of hates him for the first chunk of this book, and for no apparent reason. I think there could have been a reason that there could have been something she was holding against him, which I guess could make sense, but she didn't even say that. It was she just had made up her mind that Will was the worst, and that went on for so long, even after I feel Will had kind of I don't know, proved that he was a nice person and was going to help Tilly. I don't know, not that she's required to like somebody, but I just felt that was kind of weird that we had no real reason for her animosity towards him, when from everything we had seen, he was a decent person and just very likable. I do think he was more frustrating at the beginning of the book, but just that went on for a really long time. Tilly's annoyance with him went on for a really long time, I felt. And then my other big issue, probably the bigger issue, is I wasn't completely satisfied with the ending. Some things happened that I just don't think were dealt with properly, and part of it maybe is because I had built up this idea of what I thought was going on, which I personally found more interesting, but definitely, I think definitely more twisted than what actually ended up happening. But that's what I thought we were heading towards. And so maybe part of it is that I was just I had an expectation that wasn't met. But I think even more importantly than that, there were just these big things that I think were not addressed properly at the ending. Not to say that that ending couldn't have happened. There were elements that could have played out convincingly, but they didn't for me. But overall, I did really enjoy this, and I gave Frost Hollow Hall 4 stars. Next, I finished a poetry collection, and that is Goddess of the Hunt by Shelby Eileen. And these are poems about the goddess Artemis. And I actually have not rated this collection. I've done that before with poetry, where sometimes I don't feel like one read through is enough to really figure out my feelings on poetry, so I haven't rated this one. I did really like a lot of the poems at the beginning, and there were a few others that I really enjoyed. There was one about Hestia that I absolutely loved near the end of the collection. But I think the big thing about this one that made me feel I couldn't rate it is I think this is a much more narrative collection than I was expecting. When I went into it, and based on how the book starts out, I kind of thought they were going to be more or less separate poems. They might continue certain themes or ideas, but I didn't think they were put together to make a story. And then as I got farther in, I realized that's not really true, and I was missing big things, I think, because I didn't realize that this was supposed to be one narrative, more or less. There were a couple of very big things that happen in this collection that were referred to in later poems where I was whoa, wait, I did not realize that happened. So I did not read this because I didn't feel like I could. But like I said, I did enjoy some of these poems a lot, and I really love that there is a list of content warnings at the beginning. And I am looking forward to reading more by Shelby Eileen and to returning to this collection at some point to try and figure out exactly how I feel about it. Next, I finished The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This is the Robin Buss translation, and this was a buddy read with my friend Kelly from Cozy Reader Kelly. I think I will, like, I actually have a spoiler-free review and like discussion about this book that will be coming up at some point. I don't know if that's already up, but I had a lot of thoughts on this book, which makes sense because it is a chunk. This is such a big book. So this is very well known as a like famous classic revenge story. We are following our main character Edmond Dantès, who is unfairly convicted and kept in prison for a very long time, and when he finally gets out, he swears revenge on the 3 people that put him there. And the rest of the book is about how he goes about that. And of course there's like other subplots that feed into that as well. And overall I really enjoyed this, which was, I was very happy about because I recently reread The Three Musketeers for our Past Classics live show in I think December or January, and I hated that book. So I was very nervous that I was going to be reading a like 1200 plus page book that I also hated, but I didn't. I actually really liked this. One of the biggest like drawbacks, or like one of the things that I kept thinking throughout the book is like, does this need to be 1200 pages? And I think probably not. Like, this is a really long book and I don't think it necessarily needed to be as long as it did, but I will say this, I think that Alexandre Dumas actually did use that page count pretty well. Like for character development and for like building the story and building emotional investment too, because I think we have to see what Edmond goes through in order to really buy into this like revenge plot and to see like who he's up against and to be angry enough on his behalf. So I actually think that worked really well. And I also think there were a lot of times where I was like, okay, but how does this connect to the story? Like, who are these random characters? Why are we spending so much time with them? And then almost every time they would get tied back into the main story, which I really appreciated. There were still a couple places where I'm like, did we need this bandit's whole life story though? I think not. But overall, I think it really did tie together very satisfyingly. This was also a really great one to buddy read. As with like other classics, like especially long classics like War and Peace I mentioned, I think buddy reading this one is the way to go if you can, because it's just really fun to talk about. I also really liked a lot of these characters. Like, I really felt for a lot of them, and I was also pleasantly surprised with the female characters in this book. Like, they're not like fantastically developed or anything, but compared to Three Musketeers, so much better. Like, I mean, this book is better than Three Musketeers in every conceivable way, but one of the ways is the treatment of women. Like, they actually have agency in this book. There are a couple of scenes where they actually affect the story. What a concept. And again, like, they're not like amazingly developed characters, but I did like them, and I feel like they actually had some personality. I also liked the writing. This translation was very good and very readable. Like, this is a long book, but it's not like hard to follow. And thankfully there weren't too many chapters involving ships. Thank goodness, because I really don't like those. I think at one point I messaged Kelly, and because they had just, I think, landed or they had just gotten back on a ship or something, I was like, if this is another ship chapter, I'm going to cry. But there weren't that many, and so that was great for me. I also thought the themes this book dealt with was just, I think it was really interesting, and it did them very thoughtfully. Like, I don't see how you could read this book and not think about various criminal justice systems and the way that we treat incarcerated people. And I think obviously this book is a revenge story, so there's a lot of like discussion and ideas about revenge versus forgiveness and mercy, and I think that was really interesting. And I also found the plot aspect just really engaging and really satisfying. Like, it's just very enjoyable and satisfying to watch Edmond like put these plans into action. Like, it's just fun to watch people be competent and clever, so that was really enjoyable. There were a couple things I did not like though, like besides, you know, the length being a little unnecessary sometimes. There were some aspects of the ending I didn't love. Some parts I did. Some parts I think the ending did really well, especially the way it blended some of the themes of this book that seem kind of in opposition to each other. The way it played off of those, I think, was very impressive. But there were some aspects of the ending that I didn't enjoy. Specifically, there's a couple female characters who I just was really unhappy with the way their stories ended. One of them was just plain weird, and one of them I just was very disappointed in, so I didn't like that. And then the only other really like negative thing to say is just, as with many classics, you know, check content warnings, because there are quite a few in this. A lot of Orientalism in this one, for example. Again, I always list all content warnings I can remember in the description box. So that's one to be aware of for this book. And also the portrayal of slavery was sometimes, it was very inconsistent, because sometimes the way it's treated was just very like off-putting and just, yeah, not great. But then there were other times where it seemed like the characters were acknowledging that like slavery was a bad thing. So be aware going into this book, but I did overall really enjoy it, and I gave the Count of Monte Cristo 4 stars. Next, I finished Antigone Rising, The Subversive Power of the Ancient Myths by Helen Morales. This is a nonfiction book that was gifted to me by my friend Yvette from Book Cave, and I really enjoyed this. This is a fairly short nonfiction book, but I think it is really, really effective at what it does. Helen Morales is basically, her premise for this book is looking at the influences of classical culture and stories and the way those have an effect on our current like society and culture, sometimes in very direct ways. Like, I did not realize that we can blame misinterpretations of Hippocrates for so much of diet culture, and then sometimes in less direct ways, and I thought this was really fantastic. This is another good example of why I don't usually rate nonfiction based on how like groundbreaking its ideas are, because this book is not really saying anything new, but I think the way it collects these things together, the way Helen Morales writes about them in a really accessible but really thorough way, I think is very impressive and very important. I think the particular examples she uses are great, and I also think she doesn't overreach the premise. Like, she says right from the beginning that she is not saying with every chapter, and the Greeks did something like this, and that's why we do this other thing. Like, sometimes it is more direct, but a lot of times it's just like how the stories that we tell and remember speak to underlying beliefs or values, or like they can influence our beliefs or values, and I just thought this was fantastic. Like, some of it is infuriating, like the first chapter or so in particular is very tough to read, and yeah, it makes you really sick and angry, because it's about femicide and other things like that, and the author talks about that throughout the book, but there are a couple of chapters in particular that are very difficult to read for that reason. But it's a really important book, and I think and I hope that this would maybe be a good introductory book for people who are open to learning more about these ideas, but who are maybe feeling a little put off. I don't know how to explain it. Like, obviously if somebody is set on hating women, you probably can't change their mind with a single book. But if, for example, like maybe people who are learning more about feminism but who don't really understand the concept or the importance of intersectionality, this book could be a great like intro for that. Or maybe people who don't really think that sexism is that much of a problem anymore, but they might be open to being proved wrong. This book could be great for that. But even if you have even if you have read or like you know about these things, I think you could still get a lot out of this book. I really, really loved the way that she talked about Antigone. That's a play I love anyway, and I just think the way that she like talked about that character in that play was just very effective, and especially the way that she talks about the inspiring or the admirable aspects of Antigone's character, but also how she puts that in contrast to the way that you can do good by leaning on a community. I just thought that was really interesting. I've never thought about that before, and I really liked that. I also really loved the way that she addressed the Lysistrata story and the way that so often we reduce women's activism to withholding sex, even when that's not really what's going on. I mean, like, I think Lysistrata is a play worth reading, but I really appreciated the way she interrogated that here. I just really liked this. Again, I liked the way she used her examples. There are several like classical texts that I've never had any interest in reading, like Ovid's Metamorphoses, and now I'm kind of intrigued based on the things that Helen Morales said about it. So I think that's really cool. There's also a chapter on Beyonce where she uses the Apeshit music video to talk about like iconography and like the way like beauty standards and how that fits into like history and culture and all of that, and that was just such a fantastic chapter, and I was really impressed with the way that she could describe these like sections of the music video in a way that you could like picture what she was talking about, because believe it or not, I had not seen that music video up to this point. I don't know how I like missed that, because I remember like when it came out, but apparently I just hadn't watched it yet. But after reading this, I definitely did watch it, and it was fantastic. But anyway, I just really loved this. I gave Antigone Rising 5 stars. Next, I finished Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. This is the first book in a political fantasy series that does involve dragons, and it is based on, I think it's like partly inspired by Plato's Republic. So this is a very political fantasy, and this has been getting like some really solid hype, I think, for the first couple books in the series. Bethany from Beautifully Booked Bethany did a reading vlog where she read books with dragons in them, and that her review was really what sold me on this book, because I had heard people talking about it, and I think I even had it on my TBR, but I hadn't really, she like reignited my interest in it, and I did really enjoy this. So this book follows 2 main characters, Lee and Annie, who's short for Antigone, which is a detail I love. So this is set after a revolution. So Lee is, unbeknownst to the current current like protector of this new government. He is the son of one of the lords that were overthrown in this revolution, but he's grown up under this different identity. And our other main character is Annie, who is an orphan. Her parents were killed by dragonfire, and she was from one of the lower classes pre-revolution. And now this is supposed to be like this egalitarian society. People from all backgrounds have the opportunity to become dragon riders, which was originally something restricted to the wealthy upper class people. And Lee and Annie are both members of this dragon riding corps, or like military academy or something, and they are competing to find out who's going to be the first rider, which is like kind of the head person. I'm describing this very badly, but it's very well explained in the book. So they're competing for that, and also while that is happening, there seems to be this new threat from another kind of kingdom or area. I really liked this. One thing I was immediately impressed with is the perfect amount of like world building and setup, because you start like during a like dragon battle like practice almost, or competition, and the way Rosaria Munda like starts you right away with like some action, but also gives you plenty to know like what's going on. I was just very impressed with, because she didn't overwhelm me with details, but you knew enough. So I just was really appreciated that she gave you the perfect amount of information. It wasn't hard to follow, it wasn't boring, but you knew what was going on. And then as the story went, you got more and more details as you needed them. I just thought that was perfectly done. I also loved Annie as a main character. I also really liked Lee most of the time. We'll get to that, but I liked them as characters. I think the characterization in general was just really good. Something that really struck me about this book is I actually thought the antagonists were like well done characters, because like obviously you're not usually supposed to like antagonists or villains, but there are a lot of times where I read a book and like the villain just like annoys me. Like, it's not even like, oh, I don't like you because we're not supposed to like you. It's like, you're just irritating every time you're on page and I'm sick of you. Whereas in this book, even though there's a character who is like an antagonist to the main characters and just like really sucks as a person, it makes sense why they're in the story, and I think they were well done. And even though I like don't like them, it wasn't like every time they were on page I was like, ugh, gross, you know? Like, I feel like I'm explaining this very badly, but you know what I mean? Sometimes there's characters where like you're supposed to dislike them, but they just irritate you. And this was not one of those cases, which was nice. Also, special mention to, I think her name was Krissa. I really liked her. I think she could have very easily been stereotyped for her particular role in the story, but she wasn't, and I really liked that. I also think Lee and Annie have a really, really interesting dynamic. I think that was explored really well. I also liked the way the dragons were used in this book. I think there was like the perfect amount of dragons in this book. And I, unsurprisingly, because of the premise of this book, I thought the political aspects were just really, really well done. And the way that those played off of the themes of this book, and like how much are you willing to do for the greater good, and at what point do you become not the good guys anymore? Yeah, like this book did so many things really well, like regarding the themes, and just really made you think about things like that. As for the things that I didn't like so much, I mentioned Lee kind of getting on my nerves a couple times. There's like a few specific things he does that just really irritated me, and they always irritate me when characters do them, and I don't think it's fair to other characters, but he did it anyway. And like, I can see why he'd be tempted, but the fact that he did this so many times just really pissed me off, so I didn't love that. And then there was one big plot thing that happened that I really did not like. I was livid. Like, I was so angry when this happened. I was like, this makes no sense. This is not how the book has been set up. I'm just so angry at this storytelling choice, and I was already thinking about like how mad I was gonna be when I talked about it in my wrap up. And then by the end of the book, I think the author pulled it off and like kind of turned it around for me. I still wish it hadn't happened that way, but I'm not like furious like I was before. But anyway, I did really enjoy this, and I gave Fireborn 4 stars. Next, I finished Song of the Crimson Flower by Julie C. Dow, and this is a standalone book, standalone fantasy book that takes place in the same world as her Forest of 1,000 Lanterns? I think that's the name of the book. It takes place in the same world as that series, but it is a standalone. You don't have to read those other books. I have not, and I still followed this one perfectly. I think it probably does spoil a couple of plot things, but I was not planning to read those books anyway, so it didn't bother me. And I actually had no interest in this book until my friend Margaret from The Word Nerd talked about it in a wrap-up, and she also had not been interested in the premise, but the things she said about the way it was executed made me think I would really like it, and I did. Like, I loved this. So this is a fantasy with a strong romance element, probably like a maybe it's even a fantasy romance. And we're following two main characters, Bao and Lan. And Lan is this beautiful girl who is the daughter of a wealthy family, and she's like in the higher class, and Bao is an orphan and he is much lower class. He's like an apprentice to a doctor. So they're from very different social standings. And then because of some identity mix-ups, some deliberate, some not, Lan thinks that Bao is the man that she's supposed to marry, who she's in love with and she's really excited to marry. And then when she finds out that he's not, she turns him down in a really cruel and hurtful way, because by this point Bao has actually fallen in love with Lan, and so she really kind of breaks his heart and he goes away. Things happen. He ends up becoming cursed to be like, he's basically like attached, his soul is like attached to this magical flute, and all these things happen where essentially what this means is that Bao and Lan have to travel together to try and figure out a way to break this curse. And a lot of the aspects of the curse seem kind of like written a certain way so that we can create these really great like shipping moments, and I didn't even care. Like, I loved it. I loved all the shipping moments. It was so cute. And that leads me into like one of my favorite things about this book, which was the romance and these two main characters. I just loved them so much. Lan develops so much. I really love her character growth. I really love the romance between them. I mentioned there's like a few particular scenes that are just like such a great like ship moments, and I just loved them. I also really liked Bao. He is such a sweetheart, and I just really loved seeing like these two characters develop. And something I love with Lan's journey is that through this journey and through the adventures that they go through as they try to break this curse, there's also some like political stuff going on, because there is a disease in this world that can only be treated with a certain flower, but the flower is very dangerous. It's kind of parallel to the opium drug. So there's like other political things going on as well. But while Lan and Bao are traveling and trying to break this curse, it kind of ends up like Lan ends up rediscovering aspects of herself that she has kind of like forgotten or suppressed in order to be this like perfect lady and everything, like her humor and her love of adventure. And it was just so wonderful to see her like rediscover those parts of herself. And it was also so lovely to see Bao become like more confident in himself. And again, I just love these characters together. I also really liked the world. I think that Julie C. Dao did an excellent job of situating you in this world and plot without like overwhelming you with information, because this is a fairly short book and I still had a very clear idea of this world and what was going on. I also really liked some of the side characters. There's also a side romance that I really enjoyed, and I do think this book touched on some important themes, like I mentioned with the way that the drug aspect is talked about. I think was really well done, and I think also this book brings up questions of, you know, like Fireborn, what is acceptable for the greater good? Like how far can you go before you're not doing good anymore? And I just really liked the way that this book handled that. And overall, this book was just so much fun. Like, it was something that I was exactly in the mood for, even though I didn't know it at the time. So yeah, like, I don't know if everybody would have like this gushing of a reaction to it as I did, but this was just like the perfect book at the perfect time for me, and I gave Song of the Crimson Flower 5 stars. Next, I finished Descendant of the Crane by Joan Ha. This is a very political fantasy, and this was a buddy read with my friend Manal from Manal and Her Books. And this book, like, I don't know if my mid-year book freakout tag is going up before or after this video, so you might have already heard about this and a couple of these books, but I am still so surprised that this book worked for me, because there are a lot of things about it that I should not have liked. But first, the summary. So we're following our main character, Princess Hasina, and right at the beginning of the book, this book starts very soon after her father dies. Her father, the king, dies, or the emperor, I don't remember which they call him. And it's in kind of suspicious circumstances, but nobody else is willing to believe that Hasina's father was murdered. So she starts pursuing a court case, like, to investigate and to find out what happened. So there's like a courtroom drama aspect of this for part of this book. And she's kind of like taking power, like, poor girl, she's kind of like inheriting the responsibility for this country just in time for everything to fall apart, because there are like political things happening, like other kingdoms are like preparing to invade. She doesn't know who she can trust among her advisors, like, just everything is going wrong. And there, like, so much happens in this book. There's also, the world is really interesting because there are these people called sooths or soothsayers who were hunted down and executed many years before, when the new kind of imperial like regime took over. Actually kind of similar to Fireborn. It's like their whole thing is like they overthrew the like corrupt emperors and now they're like the good guys. So just like so much happens in this book. And yeah, so going back to the reasons that I probably shouldn't have liked this as much as I did, there are a lot of aspects that are kind of underdeveloped. Like the side characters are very flat, the romance is very underdeveloped, but I liked it anyway. I also like Hesina makes a lot of fairly big mistakes because nobody will tell her literally anything, and that is something I often find incredibly frustrating in books. But it just, I like didn't hate it here. Like, I think because Hesina was like just really like trying to do the best she could, and I don't know, for whatever reason I was just kind of along for the ride with this book. I really liked the world. I thought the magical aspect, like, and the soothsayer aspect was really interesting, and the twists and turns of this book were just so interesting. This is one that I had a lot of fun buddy reading, because like Manal and I would message each other and we'd be like, oh my god, like, can you believe this thing happened? Like I have said before, I'm very good at figuring out where stories will go and certain things that will happen, and there were like one or two things I kind of knew about, like I kind of figured out with this book, but the vast majority of things that happened I did not see coming at all, and that in itself was very exciting. So like, I'm usually a character person over a plot person, but the plot of this one was just like fantastic. At least I really enjoyed it, and how surprising it was. I also really felt for Hesina as a main character. I really liked her, and I think that was one of the things that made me a little more forgiving of how frustrating her part in the plot was, because I really felt for her, and like I said in the summary, it kind of feels like she's inheriting everything just as it all falls apart. So in some ways it's like I can't really blame her for how wrong things go, because it was like she's doing the best she can, and it's other people's fault for not telling her more. I also really loved the courtroom drama aspects of this book, and I actually wish we had gotten a lot more of those. Those are some of my favorite parts of the book, and I expected that to be a bigger element. But yeah, like overall I really enjoyed this. I found it very compelling. I also, like, I can see why this book is a very mixed bag for a lot of people, or like some people really love it, some people hate it. But I enjoyed it, and I was also glad I was kind of prepared for not everyone being satisfied with the ending, because I think being prepared for that helped me actually be satisfied with the ending. But yeah, I enjoyed this. I can see why a lot of people wouldn't, but I gave Descendant of the Crane 4 stars. And then finally, the last book I'm going to talk about today is All You Need Is Love by Tanya Guerrero. Need as in bread need. It's very cute. The title is very cute. And the book itself is in some ways not very cute. It handles some very difficult topics. We're following our main character named Alba, and she is sent to stay with her grandmother in Spain, who I don't think she's ever met, because her mother is finally preparing to leave her abusive husband, so Alba's father, and she doesn't want Alba around for that, like while she tries to get out. But Alba doesn't know this for the first part of the book, so she kind of feels like she's just been abandoned. She's never been to Spain before, so she doesn't really feel like she fits in. And then Alba ends up finding this local bakery, and she ends up helping the owner of the bakery, and she finds that making bread is a way to like work through her feelings, and I think she also has anxiety. I don't know if it's mentioned specifically in the book, but she does seem to deal with anxiety attacks or panic attacks, and kneading bread and like baking bread is one of the things that kind of helps her work through that. But then it looks like the bakery's in trouble, so Alba starts fighting to help save the bakery along with some friends and family, and I did really like this overall. I really loved the baking element. I really felt for Alba so much. Like, this book was very hard to read in some places, even though it's very appropriately described. Like, I think this book is a really good example of how you can write heavy topics into middle grade books in a way that is still appropriate for the age range. Like, because none of it's on page, and most of it is not very detailed at all, but like to just see the things that Alba and her mother went through was very difficult at times. And like the emotional and verbal abuse that Alba experiences, and the way that she just thinks that's normal, like, it was really, really heartbreaking. But I think the way the book handled it was really well done. And I really liked some of the side characters, like some of the friendships Alba forms. I really, really loved her grandmother and the way that they slowly open up to each other and get to know each other. Well, Alba is very slow to open up because, for understandable reasons, she has been made very wary of accepting new people into her life. It was also really great to see Alba like connect with her family and her culture, because she is part Spanish and part Filipino. And I didn't realize this, but there's a pretty significant Filipino population in Barcelona, which is where Alba is staying. So it was really cool getting to see her explore that. I also loved the ending of this book. It was really, really lovely. So yeah, I thought this book was really well done. I think my biggest issue I had is the way some of the story about her mother was handled, because I think there's a way to acknowledge what Alba's mother went through in this abusive relationship, while also holding her accountable for the way that she neglected Alba, like emotionally. Like, I really don't think that was ever explained satisfactorily. Like, your child should not be afraid to ask if you love them. Like, your child should not have to ask if you love them. And the fact that Alba did just really, that bothered me. Like, when Alba asked that, I honestly was wondering too, because it really did not feel like her mother loved her for like a significant part of this story. So I was just pretty dissatisfied with the way that was done. Like, I liked some of the scenes with Alba and her mother, but I just would have liked their relationship to be handled in a different way, or like her mother's like behavior to be addressed in a different way. I don't know if I'm explaining this well, but like there were aspects surrounding her mother's character that really bothered me, and I don't think I think we're written off too easily, and I didn't like that. But overall, I do think this is a really well done book, and I gave All You Need Is Love 4 stars. Okay, everybody, so that was part 1 of my June wrap up. I actually feel like I have not been filming for a super long time, so maybe this will be a somewhat reasonable length, who knows? Please comment down below and let me know if you have read any of these books, what you thought of them, or if you're going to pick them up. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you soon with another video, and I hope you love the next book you read. Bye!